I made a dream come true this year. Ever since I was a young boy, I've dreamed of the Wild West, lying on the bed with my comic books all around. I imagined the pioneers in their covered wagons rolling across the prairies. The land of the cowboys and bank robbers, of Wyatt Earp, Doc Holliday, Bat Masterson and Butch Cassidy. That great showman, Buffalo Bill, and his star sharpshooter, Annie Oakley. And I cowered under the bedclothes as marauding Indians in their frightening war paint chased the cavalry through my mind. I read stories of gold and silver strikes. The prospectors rushing into the rough and ready mining town shouting, "Gold! Gold!" And I was frightened as I walked through the deserted ghost towns. And I held in awe the mighty steam trains with their forlorn whistles and belching forth clouds of black and white smoke and steam as they thundered through the mountains. At that tender age, I didn't realize that all this could be found in one single state in America. John Denver has a lot to answer for, at least his music has. Decades later, I was to be entranced by his melodies and lyrics, his songs about the beauty and romance of Colorado. With its mountains, rivers, and awe-inspiring canyons that cut deep into the bowels of the earth. The backward wilderness areas and wildflowers. The soaring Rocky Mountains, their peaks stretching over 14,000 feet into the deep blue sky, hiding their scenic and historic byways. I will never forget my first sight of these majestic natural sculptures as I journeyed from Denver into the Rocky Mountains National Park. It was one of the most incredible, heart-stopping sights of the natural world. And as I drove south along the $1 Million Highway into the lesser-known spur of the Rockies, the San Juan Mountains, I realized that they held another kind of beauty. Slightly less rugged, perhaps, but yet still commanding my attention nevertheless. And to Colorado's western border, with its hot deserts, wind-carved rock formations, and a true melting pot of culture and heritage. But getting away from the interstate roads and off the tarmac altogether, I was to discover that Colorado is the jeeping and 4x4 capital of America. By taking the backcountry dirt roads and mountain byways, not only did I encounter many personal and at times dangerous challenges, but I found that these often boulder-strewn roads were the key to unlocking the stories of my childhood. The indigenous people, the Anasazi, or Puebloans as some people call them, once lived in rock-cut houses like these in the Mesa Verde National Park. Cultured and artistic communities. But now it is believed that drought and lack of food drove them south, and then only to mysteriously disappear. The mountain men and fur trappers opened up the rugged backcountry, so would I ever realize my dream of meeting a real Indian? These hardy pioneers generally coexisted with the native people who had replaced the Anasazi, the American Indians of today. In the mountain areas of what would eventually become Colorado, it was the Ute Indian tribe that was to settle there. But like many other Indian nations, they were very badly treated by the government of the day, in what is now regarded as a very shameful part of American history.
The Ute Nation inhabited 3 states, Utah, Colorado, and New Mexico in its original form. And then as encroachment became evident, they were pushed further and further into smaller areas. And in 1886, Chief Ouray and his sub-chiefs worked out a treaty, the first one of the first ones, and they settled into certain areas that were delineated by the government with their approval. And this went on and on. Each one of the treaties that they came up with was broken subsequently, and they were removed from one place to another. And today we inhabit other reservations in Utah, where the Uncompahgre's and the White Rivers were removed to in 1881, and the Southern Utes occupy the south part of Colorado as the Southern Ute Reservation and the Ute Mountain Ute. Today we celebrate during the powwows. We come together as families and as a group to dance and to visit one another and to make new friends. And a powwow is a social event. The powwow enables all tribes to come together and join in a celebration of reuniting again and dancing those dances that have long ago been done throughout the country.
The pioneers were also chasing their own dreams as they trekked across the Great Plains in search of a new beginning, carrying everything with them in their covered wagons. Gold and silver were discovered in the mid-1800s, and this sparked a stampede into Colorado. It began with placer mining in the mountain rivers. But it didn't take long for the hard rock miners to arrive from Cornwall and Wales, and from other countries such as Germany, Czechoslovakia, Ireland and Lithuania. In fact, from many countries around the world. The only thing that they had in common was the desire for a better life. They didn't know anything about mining. They suffered death on the trek westwards, death from disease on arrival, death underground, and death in the noisy hammer mills, frequently from the lethal chemicals used in ore separation. But what emerged was the code of the West. If a stranger showed up at your camp, you treated him with the utmost hospitality. And that is also what makes Colorado unique today. The Coloradians are some of the friendliest and most welcoming people in America. Suddenly, mining camps and towns sprung up, where before there had only been wilderness. Adits were driven hundreds of feet into the mountainsides by individual prospectors. Silver barons were made as businessmen and entrepreneurs set up mining on a large scale, with mills sometimes having up to 100 stamps to crush the ore. The backcountry wilderness can, even now, be a very inhospitable and dangerous place to live. But how must it have been in Victorian times? Log cabins were not only home to single miners, but also to whole families, as here, where a family of 5 lived in this one room for many years. But log cabins were ideal for frontiers and mining camps. They were cheap. The whole area was covered in trees. They were versatile and easy to put together. They were warm, homely, and always welcoming. Equipment was transported initially by mule and burro pack trails through the mountains. But as the gold and silver fever caught hold, larger capacity ox and wagon trains were needed. This necessitated the hacking and blasting of shelf roads out of the bare mountainsides. Stagecoach routes began to appear over almost impossible high mountain passes. These were the only ways to get goods in and ore out to the smelters. As more and more ore needed to get out and the price of the metals continued to rise, so we began to see the railroads probing deeper into the mountains, frequently overcoming unbelievable obstacles by using narrow gauge lines as they could go round tighter bends, and also they didn't cost as much per mile to build. The Denver and Rio Grande Railroad was just one of several who fought for lucrative routes, literally. But the one still surviving today, and the one on which I was to make my journey of a lifetime, is the famous Durango and Silverton narrow gauge railway.
All aboard!
Durango to Silverton, that started in about 1881 when the tracks finally got to Durango, and they took off. It was a little less than 8 months for them to reach Silverton, but in the midst of that they had to go over what was called a high line. The high line is a railroad carved out of the side of the mountain on a cliff face. Employees were lowered over the side by rope, and they took their star bit and their little single jack, a small sledgehammer, and they bored themselves a hole. They filled it full of black powder, charges, put a fuse in, and they waited for everybody else along that line to do the same thing. They would light their fuses together and hope that their friends would pull them up in time before the explosion and lower them back over the edge. The crazy thing about this, they did this in the dead of winter. But they did make it in less than 8 months, and by July 4th of the following year of 1882, they had reached Silverton. And that just was the beginning of getting all the ore out, which was brought back here to Durango, where the smelter was, which was located right behind the railroad. When it was processed down into ingots, and they got a trainload of those were hauled back to Denver.
And I realized one more ambition that day by traveling in the presidential Cinco Animas coach on the journey from Durango to Silverton and back. Traveling just as the presidents of the United States of America had done before me, I felt a real sense of history. But I had an experience that I bet they never had.
Basically, the lock got stuck in the bathroom. So we tried taking the lock off, and we can't get it off because it's a slide lock. So we took the clear story off, and I was going to try to climb through, but it's that big, and I can't fit in there. So now we're going to get a brake club to try to get it down. Do you want to get a picture of this?
Okay. Show me what you're doing to the when you're trying to open the lock. Yeah.
Oh, yes, we got it! We got Betty! Oh.
Okay.
Got it.
Hello, Betsy.
Oh, no! We got Betty! Oh, honey, I am so sorry.
You all right?
I'm so sorry. Thank you very much.
Sorry it happened.
Now my biggest dream was about to come true. Being the son of a lifelong Lancashire railwayman, steam is in my blood. And I was actually going onto the footplate of engine 482, a real western train.
Hi, my name is Monty Cottle. I'm the chief engineer here at the Durango-Silverton Railroad, and you're standing on locomotive number 482. We took it on train 461 this morning, the 8:15 train. What can I tell you? It's a K36, 36,000 pounds tractive effort. It's a Mikado wheel configuration like all of ours that we use, 282 wheel configuration. We've usually had 6 or 7 engines in the roundhouse that could be used in our operation. A few other relics that are used just for parts and static display. In the summer, we run 4 trains a day. So on any given day, we have probably at least 5 locomotives fired up. We always have one for a backup locomotive. The ones we use were either built in 1925, like this one, or 1923. The 23 vintage are the K28, the 470 series. They're Alcos, American locomotive built.
Silverton was a typical lawless Colorado mining town with rowdy gambling saloons and prostitution flourishing on Blair Street. It was in Silverton in May 1883 that Wyatt Earp, Bat Masterson and Doc Holliday all met up. Gamblers and lawmakers, sometimes both at the same time. And my dream has come true as I walked in their footsteps to historic Victorian mining towns such as Silverton, Leadville, Silver Plume, Georgetown, Durango, Creede, and of course Denver. I have paid my respects at the grave of Buffalo Bill, William Cody, one of America's greatest showmen, remembering also one of his greatest sharpshooting performers and friend, Annie Oakley. And I have wallowed in railway nostalgia in Ridgeway, once the headquarters of the Rio Grande Southern Railroad, and the home of the Galloping Geese, a unique attempt to save the railroad from collapse when the mining business began to drift away. The big silver crash of 1893, when the government changed over to the gold standard, saw an almost unbelievable rapid decline in the prosperity of Colorado. Almost overnight, many of the towns and mining towns just ceased to exist. Some of them had never got beyond the stage of log cabins on rutted streets, where every second structure housed a saloon, gambling hall or whorehouse. Today, all that remains of many of them are decaying wooden buildings, spoiled tips, crumbling stamp mills and other mine buildings, and forgotten holes burrowing into the mountainsides, eerie and forlorn, sad remnants of a once prosperous age, and now simply evocative ghost towns. But others have reinvented themselves and gone on to become successful Victorian towns or cities. Some of their economies are based around the wealth generated from casinos, whilst others have gone on to become thriving commercial and tourist centres. But I have lived my dream. I have ridden high over the boulder-strewn passes of the Rockies and the San Juan Mountains, travelling the old mule trails and stagecoach routes. I have journeyed safely on the cowboy train in my adolescent dreams, on tracks blasted from the mountainside itself. I've met real American cowboys and Indians, and walked in the footsteps of prospectors and hard rock miners through once prosperous and thriving Victorian towns, some of which are now turning to dust. Ghost towns and mining camps being reclaimed by nature and haunted by the spirits of the past. And now, as I have experienced the beauty, might, and majesty of the Rockies, my dream really has come true.